unless we get rid of the anti-defection law, we are just fooling ourselves that we are living in a democracy. You need to change the incentive structures and the rules of the game to change the behavior.
Hello, thank you very much for joining me on what is going to be the final episode of our special series, India Votes 2024. Our new Lok Sabha, the 18th Lok Sabha, is ready, and it's going to convene for the first time on the 24th of June. How much will this Lok Sabha be different in its functioning from the previous one and the one before that? Because remember, in the past 10 years, we've had the BJP have a majority in parliament. This has impacted lawmaking and the functioning of parliament, especially the Lok Sabha. What should citizens expect from the 18th Lok Sabha? How do we hold the MPs that we've put in there accountable? And how can we get the Lok Sabha to function optimally, most effectively? I'm going to discuss all of this with MR Madhavan. He is the founder and president of PRS Legislative, that has, for the past 20 years almost, tracked, analyzed, studied Parliament and state legislatures, all in the effort to strengthen India's democracy. Madhavan, thank you so much for making time.
Thanks for inviting me to your show.
Do you want to give us some of the highlights in terms of the composition that PRS Legislative has, sort of analyzed and put out there? And what to you are the most striking elements of this?
We have had about half the MPs as first-timers. This Lok Sabha, last Lok Sabha, one before that, and so on. So that number has hovered between something like 48% and 55% every time, a bit up and down. So, but that's actually a striking number, because if you look at, let's say, the US House of Representatives, most people stay on and keep getting re-elected for many, many terms, which is in India. There are only 2 people who have done 7 terms. So we don't have too many people with a lot of experience in Lok Sabha in that sense. The second interesting one is the number of women in Lok Sabha has got stuck at about 14%. I mean, it has moved. So the first Lok Sabha had 5% women. This Lok Sabha, slowly it has increased. It is, last one was 14%. This time, in fact, 2 less than previous one were women. So it has got stuck, which is, if you right now constitutionally, because there's an amendment which has been done, the target is 1/3, which has to be after the next delimitation, which is not too far away. We don't know when, but definitely within the next decade. So either the next Lok Sabha or the one after that, you have to move to 33 from 14. So that will be interesting and exciting times. I was just hoping that parties would put up more women
candidates.
Women candidates. Because if you don't put up women candidates, you won't have elected women MPs.
Yes, and then it's that self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Women can't win, women don't win elections, and there is a lot of that also goes around, isn't it?
That's the other pattern. And the other interesting thing which has been this, again, most people don't know this, is more than 70% of MPs, and this is true for the last several Lok Sabhas, have a college degree. So it's not that we have a bunch of people who are not reasonably well educated. So Lok Sabha has always been well educated. And of course, I mean, not about this Lok Sabha, but the trend line from the first Lok Sabha to now has been getting slowly older. The percentage of young MPs has been declining.
Something that leaps out is the wealth of, MPs, which is that, when they declare their assets, and it's quite clear that you need to be rich, if not outright wealthy, in order to be able to compete in elections. And also for a country where 80% and more of the population is so dependent on government and government schemes in order to just get by, this kind of, this lack of symmetry between who is representing these people in the Lok Sabha seems to be quite a glaring problem. Or do you see it like that?
Yes and no, in the sense, if you look around the world, even in the US, I mean, there will be hardly any senator who's not a millionaire.
Hmm. Hmm.
Politics, unfortunately, democratic politics
Hmm.
is a rich person's game around the world. I mean, in most places, because it's in India, even more so, because there is this official limit of rupees 95 lakh that an MP can spend on an election. And as famously Mr. Vajpayee once said, uh, that he said that we enter parliament with a lie because we lie on our affidavit about how much we spend. He actually said that. So everybody knows that that 95 lakh is a mythical number. The actual number is much, much larger and in tens of crores in some of the states. So if you're actually spending that sort of money on an election, you need to have sources for that sort of money in elections. They are wealthy. That happens to be the case. I don't see that as a negative. It is just a feature. Does it keep out people who don't have wealth? Yes. Is that negative? Yes. How can that be managed? Well, can we actually figure out ways to have uh, the funding for elections so that others can, or can parties actually put up such candidates and do that? If they do that, it'll be great.
Let's take a look at the one key thing or the one most striking aspect of the 18th Lok Sabha compared to the previous two Lok Sabhas, and that is we do not have a majority party anymore. The BJP is down to 240. It will depend on its allies in order to continue to be in government for 5 years. What is the impact this will have on the way the Lok Sabha functions? And for that, if you can help us contrast it to the way it functioned, let's say in the last term, where the BJP on its own had 303 MPs.
So we'll have to wait and see what happens, frankly. It's purely speculation. But if we look
Sure.
at, but if we look at, let us say, not the BJP, because BJP, I mean, at least Mr. Modi, his 2 terms he has had a full majority. But the BJP
Yes.
has in the past, with Mr. Vajpayee as
Yeah.
the prime coalition and Mr. Dr. Manmohan. So we have a fairly long 20 years of coalition, followed by the current last 10 years of one party having a majority. One of the ways in which Parliament has declined, and it's not just the last 10 years, it's also the previous 10 years. So that's why I'm not attributing this to a single party in power or the coalition, is the way it functions in terms of checks and balances. What is the primary role of Parliament? Why do we even have a Parliament if you actually go to the basics? Because one could always say, let's have elections, like in the US system, elect a president, elect a prime minister, and let that person make all decisions. And we could have a system like that for 5 years. But we don't have a system like that. We have a parliament. There is a reason for it. The primary role of parliament is holding the government accountable for all its actions. And in fact, there is a very nice explanation of this given by Dr. Ambedkar when he introduced the draft constitution in November 1948 to the Constituent Assembly. He discusses the difference between presidential system and parliamentary systems. And he says that the drafting committee chose the parliamentary system because you would lose some stability, but there is accountability of the government on a daily basis through questions, through motions, and in fact, the final level of accountability is the no confidence motion. So, unlike a presidential system, where once a president is elected, let's say the United States president is elected, the president has a guaranteed term of 4 years, unless caught for some high treason or things like that. Not for performance.
Right, right.
Whereas here you can throw out any government for performance. Now, has Parliament been doing this role properly? My answer is no. And I would say there are several, I'll justify why I'm saying this no. Firstly, it meets far too infrequently. So Parliament used to meet
Mm.
in the 1950s. Lok Sabha used to meet between 125 and 140 days every year. Now it barely meets for about 70 days a year. So somewhere about 50 to 60% of what it used to meet then. What does that lead to? It leads to, firstly, obviously, there is a question hour every day. So fewer days, fewer questions being asked to the ministers. Fewer longer discussions, fewer areas when the government is held to account. Even on bills, the discussions are hasty because you don't have enough time. Are you discussing the union? The union budget is of the tune of over 40 lakh crore. It's our tax funds. Are we discussing, is Parliament discussing how that's being allocated? Are ministries' funds being allocated, being discussed? No. Part of the reason is they just are not meeting long enough. So I would say first, increase the term they are meeting. Second, it's the role of the opposition is extremely important in any parliamentary system because the opposition is the set of MPs who are expected to hold, every MP is expected to hold, but in practice, they are the people who would actually hold the government to account. Do they get to raise issues which they want to? Very often not. And it's a structural problem. How does the House decide what to discuss? Should we have a discussion on inflation, let's say? How does the House decide? There is a business advisory committee which identifies what are the issues to be discussed during a particular session and then decides on a weekly basis and then on a daily basis. Now, the business advisory committee has representatives primarily based on composition of parliament. And by definition, in Lok Sabha, the government of the day has majority.
Yeah.
And therefore, the business advisory committee can decide to put on the back burner issues which may embarrass the government of the day. They get the same. And that is one of the reasons you often see disruptions by the opposition, because opposition says, we want to raise this issue, and the government or the business advisory committee blocks it. So the opposition says, we will not let you discuss anything else until you discuss this, and we will not let the House operate. And then you see all the disruptions in the ruckus. In fact, Mr. Jaitley, when he was the leader of the opposition of Rajya Sabha, very famously, in a rare piece, because he was not a very frequent op-ed writer, wrote a piece in the Hindu in 2012 justifying disruptions and saying that disrupting parliament is a legitimate intervention. So that's what. How do we get past this?
How do we get past this? Because in fact, I know that you are saying that this is not something that has just happened in the past 10 years, but in the past 10 years, it has worsened. That's fair to say, isn't it?
I don't think so. I think it is the same. It is just the recency that makes us feel so.
Okay.
I was feeling as frustrated in 2014 as I am feeling today about parliament. Okay, it's a recency effect. I'll just give you specific instances from the 2004 to 14 and from 14 to 24 and say that things are equally bad in both.
Okay.
So disruptions happened. So 2010 winter session did not take place. It was totally for 2 hours over the whole session because there was a demand for the award of 2G being referred to a joint committee. Similarly, 2 years later, the CAG report on coal, the whole session went off. And then similarly, in the 10 years of the last NDA 1 and NDA 2, if I may call them that, we have seen lots of time due to disruptions on various other reasons. The UK is something called opposition days. So there are 20 days out of these where the main opposition party, in fact, if there are 2 big opposition parties, it's split between them. They decide what is the issue to be taken for the day. So then, if they want to discuss inflation, there is a particular day when they decide to set the issue. So there is no reason to disrupt. You have your slot, you raise the issue, everybody will discuss. So that's so there's a structural way of handling it, because I'm looking for structural ways of solving problems. Otherwise, there's
Not political ones.
because every party behaves the same way when they are in power and exactly the other way when they are in opposition. We have seen that across both Congress and the BJP. So, I mean, when Congress is in opposition, they behave in a particular way. When the BJP is in opposition, they behave in exactly the similar way as what the Congress does in opposition. And in power, they do the same. So I'm not looking at it politically because the parties will behave in a way because the incentive structures are structured. You need to change the incentive structures and the rules of the game to change the behavior. So change the rules of the game. That's one. But I would say a much more fundamental issue with the Indian Parliament, and which is very specific to Indian Parliament and not to other parliaments, is we invented something called the anti-defection law. And that, at least in my analysis, has made Parliament a redundant institution. It is just there for a showpiece, if I may put it that way. And I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
What does the anti-defection law say? I'll just simplify it, the core of it. On any vote, so every bill, there is a vote, there are various other motions where there are votes. On any vote, if a party issues a direction to any MP on which way to vote, the MP has to follow that direction. The party says that on this bill, you have to vote to support the bill, and the MP does not actually like the bill. The MP has no choice but to still support the bill, failing which, if the MP either opposes or is absent, the MP can lose his or her seat in Parliament and be disqualified. That is the penalty. Okay. So, effectively, this means that if your party has 130 people and the leader says that we are supporting the bill, 130 people have no choice but to support the bill. So every MP is just a number to count upon. If we are saying that the primary role of Parliament, and this is accepted by everyone around the world, is in a parliamentary system, the primary role of Parliament is holding the government to account. And two other very important roles of Parliament are enacting laws after due consideration and voting on them. And the third is sanctioning government expenditure. How much is the government spending? These are the three very important roles that Parliament face, that MPs do as our representatives. Now let's get to the accountability part. How does the accountability work? And in fact, that's the funny part is, the Supreme Court has upheld the anti-defection law in a 1992 case and in a 2023 case, which was nothing to do with anti-defection. It was the government of Delhi versus Union of India about services of Delhi under whose purview it falls.
Yeah, whether it's the LG or the elected government.
LG or the CM, let's say. Okay. So, elected government. So, there is a five-judge constitution judgment, five-judge constitution bench judgment authored by the CJI. And within that judgment, there's a nice section called accountability, where he draws the chain, he actually calls chain of accountability. And the chain of accountability is that the government officials are accountable to the ministers. Ministers are accountable to the legislature because the legislature holds them accountable. And the legislators are accountable to the people because we can vote them out. So let me simplify this to one chain, which is that the government is accountable to Parliament and Parliament is accountable to us. Okay, let's call this chain link 1 and link 2. Okay, first link, government to Parliament. The anti-defection law cuts that link. Now, let's come to the second link. Second link is, and many of us have followed the American elections, whenever there is a senator, especially, who is contesting for presidential election, in the debates and questions, people are asking the senator, on this particular bill, why did you vote on this way? On the bill to support, on the vote to support Iraq war, did you support it? Can you justify? Let's say I ask my MP, on this bill, why did you support? When the MP comes for re-election, the MP has a ready answer. I did not have a
Party
choice.
told me, yeah.
Me. I don't have freedom. So the MP is no longer accountable to me. Unless we get rid of the anti-defection law, we are just fooling ourselves that we are living in a democracy where the government is accountable to us. I'm actually making a very strong statement.
But no party that I can see will want to go down this path.
No party leadership will want. Party MPs would love it because the leadership now holds control over the MPs. But I still think, though I don't like the idea of courts getting into this, but on something like this, which is structural, I think that this directly violates the basic structure of the Constitution.
How would you evaluate the way lawmaking has happened in the past 10 years? I do understand that you're trying to give us conceptually why we need to understand what to expect from an efficient parliament. But in the past 10 years, because of the majority, we have seen a further deterioration in the way parliament functions.
One significant way it has gone down is the role of standing committees.
Yes.
So, if in the previous two Lok Sabhas, which is 4 to 9 and 9 to 14 together, something, if I remember the numbers correctly, I'm speaking from memory, somewhere about 60-65% of all bills were referred to standing committees for detailed discussion. And I'll tell you why that's important. Standing committees are formed of MPs from across parties. They usually, because they are not televised, they actually discuss things in a very civil manner, call in experts, they ask expert advice, and then they form their final decision. And you would see that in a majority of cases, I would say more than 90% of standing committees, there is no dissent notes. So there is compromise. Finally, the standing committee report is a consensus report, a compromise. So that's his place for actually examining the bill clause by clause, finding the issues, etc. So about 60-65% of the bills were going. Now the number is less than 20%, the last parliament. So bills are not being examined in detail by standing committees. So therefore, the quality of the bill being passed has deteriorated because the government has introduced a bill. It's a job of MPs to actually look at it carefully and decide whether they want this or change some parts of it. They are unable to do that. Because in the House, there's always limited time. And the House, you end up, because you're also talking to the camera and to your constituents, there's always some posturing. That's politics. The committees is where actually the real work takes place.
And you expect that to get a fillip in this Lok Sabha?
I would slightly change that word. I would say, I hope it changes. I have learned to, so that I don't feel disappointed in life, I've learned to keep my expectations low.
Okay.
And just keep hopes up.
Right. Madhavan, a quick question on the speaker, because we know that I think on the 26th of June, we'll have the speaker, and the speaker's role has come under a lot of focus, especially in the state legislatures. On social media, you hear parties that have borne the brunt of speaker decisions going against them, advising the current allies in the NDA government to insist on having a say on who the speaker is. Explain to people the speaker's role and why it is important in the current political reality.
Okay, there are two very different roles which the speaker has, and both make the role very important. One of the roles which is highlighted in all these discussions, and including the Maharashtra one, etc., is the anti-defection law role, where if somebody is accused of having defected by a party, the speaker is the decision maker. And we have had numerous instances, blatant. For example, there was an incident in Andhra Pradesh about 8 years ago, when the TDP was in government, and I think 20 odd MLAs of YSRCP defected and joined the TDP. YSRCP moved the anti-defection petition. 4 of those people were made ministers. So they were ministers in the TDP government. And the speaker just sat on the application for years. So there's a period of years where the assembly website officially said they were members of the leading main opposition party and they were also ministers. So there was this absurdities done. So that is one important role. But on a day-to-day basis also, speaker has a lot of important responsibilities. For example, speaker has a lot of discretion on many issues. So things like there is something called an adjournment motion. Should it be allowed or not? There are places where is a bill a money bill or is it not? Speaker decides. So what is the implication of that? If it's a money bill, then and Speaker of Lok Sabha is marked as a money bill, Rajya Sabha has only an advisory role. They cannot vote down or amend the bill. So there, and I would say I'll give you a couple of even more egregious examples where the speaker has done certain things. There was a no confidence motion moved against the Manmohan Singh government in 2013. This was at the peak of the Telangana agitation for creating Andhra Pradesh out of Telangana separating it out, right? Telangana. What does the rule book say about a no confidence motion? Okay, and why? So it is the most important motion because you have raised a question, an MP has raised a question whether the government is a legitimate government. Do they have a majority in the House? Because that is the legitimacy. And any action the government does, including answering to a question in the questionnaire, is subject to it being a legitimate government. So the legitimacy has to be decided as soon as possible. And then once it's decided, move ahead, right? That's the way one would do. So what does the Lok Sabha rule say? It says that if any MP raises a motion, moves a motion for a no confidence motion, the speaker shall, as soon as possible, basically immediately, put this question to the House and ask how many people want to move ahead with this motion. Please stand up in your seats. So they stand up. If there are 50 of them who are standing up, in Lok Sabha has a membership of 543, 500 plus even if there are some vacancies. So if 50 of them stand up, then the speaker has to fix a date and time for a discussion and vote on the motion within the next 10 days. This is what the rule book says. Okay. Now 2013, just winter session, so just 6 months to go before the election. Frankly, it doesn't matter if the government falls. But it would have forced Congress MPs to show their hand regarding Telangana because that was very contentious within the Congress. And they did not want the vote. So there were disruptions happening in the House, and the speaker every day will say that I am unable to count whether there are 50 people because the House is not in order. Fair enough. Except that during this period, when the speaker could not count that the House was in order, the speaker could count that there was a bill to reorganize Andhra Pradesh into Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, and it could be passed with majority support. So he could count that majority, but he could not count this. Okay. Fast forward 5 years. 2018, there is a no confidence motion moved against the Narendra Modi government of that day. There's NDA. I mean, there's no question about the motion passing because BJP on its own had 282. Forget the allies. But some of the allies were on the fence on certain issues. And if there is a motion, they
It would
would
be
be
embarrassing.
it would be embarrassing if they vote against.
Yeah.
So again, disruption created, vote not taken, but a 30 lakh crore budget passed in the meantime. And the speaker is allowing this and enabling this. It has happened across both the regimes.
I'm going to wrap this up by asking you, so the citizens of India have taken to elections and voting and exercising their franchise extremely wholeheartedly. We are quite proud about, voting and being a democracy. And this series, India Votes 2024, I started with a conversation with Dr. S.Y. Qureshi, former Chief Election Commissioner, and he said that, great elections do not convert into great democracy. How do we ensure that this great election converts into a great democracy? Just looking at the 18th Lok Sabha election and us keeping tabs on it.
Two things I would say. One is, as citizens, our rights and responsibilities both do not end with going and pressing that button at the EVM once in 5 years. We should actually engage and for our own benefit, engage and involve ourselves with the parliamentary system, the lawmaking system, the decision-making system continuously throughout. And there are a lot of opportunities actually available in the system. For example, standing committees, so if bills are referred to standing committees or issues are being taken up by standing committees, they put out advertisements, they ask people to write into them, they invite people. So even, I'll just give you a recent example. About 6 months ago or about a year ago, I think 8 months ago, the Standing Committee on Finance was looking at cryptocurrencies, and they had actually got in a lot of people. They got in people who are engaged in that thing to understand issues. So I would say, as citizens, follow what's happening and give in your inputs as citizen groups, etc., and get engaged. So that is the first main thing. As citizens, we should actually push for systemic reforms in the way our parliament functions. And to me, of course, as I said, anti-defection law is the top one. But beyond that, even things like, if I want to know, and I think I have a right to know which way my MP voted on every issue, because my MP is my representative out there. Today, I don't, because Parliament doesn't record that. Parliament, most votes are usually a voice vote, and only if any MP demands for division is taken. So we can actually ask enough MPs to say, please ask for a division on every vote. And then that's a relatively easy thing, because if you convince a few MPs to form a group to say that we are going to reform, all you need is about a dozen of them out of 543 who say, okay, this is something we have taken up as our reform. And it can be cross-party, but they should be brave enough to face the party leadership. But it should, a bunch of maverick, 12 of them, is good enough to say, we will get a division on the final vote and everything. So we know where on every MP stands and on the issue, and even whether they were present when the vote was there. Because I think as a citizen, I should have a right to know what my representative is doing that. And so I would say, as citizens, that's how we should engage ourselves in tracking and forcing them to look at larger national issues and not really follow up MPs on things like which are not in their mandate, like our potholes and
yes.
I mean, no, that is the mandate of the corporator or the panchayat member.
Yeah.
So we should also understand what are the roles of
what is the role of the MP.
Of the MP and of the panchayat guy, and go to the right person for the right job.
For the right thing. So I think we should, besides, looking at Rajya Sabha TV and Lok Sabha TV, we should keep tabs on PRS as well. You have an active social media.
And I hope this reaches as many people as possible, because we need our citizens to be engaged beyond elections.
Here's wishing the MPs and all of us who call this unique country our own a lot of good luck in the next 5 years. I hope we get the democracy and the government that we deserve. I've had great fun and have understood a lot more in the process of getting this series out for you. I hope you've enjoyed it. Look out for our continuing coverage as we go along and keep supporting Anuradha Says. That is what the channel is called. Thank you very much for watching and thank you for giving us your time.